Sir, what are you doing sitting here? What's in the case?
I'm waiting for my wife. What does it look like?
I need to know what's inside.
It's a guitar, man.
Open it up right now or you're going to be arrested.
You serious? It's my guitar.
Memorial Hospital's security guard, Michael Brennan, noticed a man seated in the lobby with a large case beside him. The man hadn't said anything threatening, hadn't moved suspiciously, and hadn't bothered a single person around him. Yet Brennan walked straight to his office and dialed 911, reporting a suspicious individual who might be carrying a weapon. In his mind, a black man with a large case in a hospital waiting area could only mean danger. When officers Patrick Doyle and Matthew Rowlands showed up, they marched directly toward the man, Victor Ellison, and gave him an ultimatum: open the case immediately or face arrest for obstruction and non-cooperation with a police investigation. What neither Brennan nor the officers had bothered to find out was that Victor Ellison was an accomplished professional musician with Grammy-nominated credits to his name. The case held a restored vintage Martin guitar valued at $12,000. And this entire encounter, triggered by nothing more than racial bias, would eventually result in a lawsuit that cost the hospital and the city close to $1 million. Before we continue, where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. And if you think a man should be able to sit in a hospital lobby with a guitar case without police being summoned, hit the like button and subscribe. On a Thursday afternoon in mid-April, Memorial Hospital's lobby looked like any other. People waited in chairs for appointments. Visitors signed in at the front desk. Staff members in scrubs moved through the space carrying tablets and folders. Phones rang at the reception counter. Quiet conversations filled the air. The PA system occasionally called out doctor names. It was the kind of environment that was busy without being chaotic, and absolutely nothing happening there would have alarmed any reasonable person. Victor Ellison, 42 years old, sat near the east wall with his phone in hand and a guitar case standing upright between his feet. He had spent 2 decades as a professional session guitarist, performing on albums by artists most people would immediately recognize, recording in studios across 3 states, and earning a reputation as someone you called when you needed a guitarist who could handle jazz, blues, or classical music, often in a single take. He was dressed in dark jeans, a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and clean leather shoes. His appearance was neat and professional. He looked exactly like what he was, a working musician with somewhere to be, passing time while he waited. He had been there for roughly 25 minutes. His wife Angela was upstairs finishing a cardiology follow-up appointment, which was running a little longer than expected. He had texted her to let her know he'd wait in the lobby. The guitar was with him because he had just retrieved it from a luthier who had spent 3 weeks restoring a 1968 Martin D28 that Victor had purchased at an estate sale 2 years prior. Now fully restored, the instrument was worth around $12,000, far too valuable to leave sitting in a parking lot. He scrolled through emails, replied to a producer asking about his availability for a session the following week, and checked the time. Angela should be wrapping up within the next 10 minutes. He pocketed his phone and looked around the lobby, watching people come and go, nothing particular on his mind. That was the moment Michael Brennan passed by. Brennan was 48 years old and had worked security at Memorial Hospital for 6 years. He carried himself with the air of someone who considered his role extremely important. Over those 6 years, he had developed a reputation among staff for being excessively watchful, something some colleagues found reassuring and others found troubling. He had received 3 formal complaints from black visitors, each describing how he had followed them through the building, questioned their reasons for being there, or treated them with suspicion while they were simply visiting loved ones or waiting for appointments. All 3 complaints were logged in his personnel file and addressed with verbal warnings. None of them led to any real disciplinary action. As Brennan moved through the lobby on his regular patrol, his gaze settled on Victor. He slowed his pace and stopped about 15 feet away, positioning himself near a column where he could watch without being directly visible. For 2 full minutes, he stood there observing Victor, watching him scroll through his phone, watching him shift the case slightly so it wasn't in anyone's way, watching him do absolutely nothing that could reasonably be described as threatening or suspicious. None of that changed what Brennan had already decided. In his mind, a black man with a large case in a hospital lobby could only be hiding something dangerous. Despite the calm demeanor, the professional appearance, and the completely ordinary behavior, Brennan had already formed his conclusion, not based on evidence, but on bias. He left his spot near the column, went to the security office on the first floor, sat down at the desk, and called 911. 911, what's your emergency? This is Michael Brennan, security at Memorial Hospital. There's a suspicious individual in the main lobby. Black male, mid-40s, sitting alone with a large case. There may be a weapon inside. I need officers here right away. The dispatcher asked the standard questions. Has he made any threats or shown a weapon? No, but he's been there for a while just watching people. I don't know who he is, and that case is big enough to hold something dangerous. Any other concerning behavior? Brennan paused for a moment. The truthful answer was no. Victor hadn't done a single thing, but he had already placed the call, and walking it back now would mean admitting he had overreacted. He's just sitting there acting suspicious. I think someone should come check it out. The dispatcher confirmed the address and informed him officers were on their way. Brennan returned to the lobby and positioned himself where he could monitor Victor until the police arrived. Victor had no idea any of this was happening. He was still in his chair, still on his phone, still waiting for Angela. He glanced up once, noticed Brennan watching him from near the entrance, and thought it was slightly odd but not alarming. Security guards observe people. That was part of the job. 7 minutes later, 2 uniformed officers entered through the front doors. Officers Patrick Doyle and Matthew Rowlands walked with the kind of deliberate stride that made heads turn. Doyle had 8 years on the force. Rowlands had 4. They had been dispatched on a report of a suspicious person with a possible weapon, and the dispatcher had relayed that the security guard believed the individual might be armed. Brennan met them near the entrance. That's him over there with the case. He's been sitting there for about half an hour. I think there could be something dangerous inside. Doyle looked across the lobby at Victor, still seated, still on his phone, completely unaware he was being discussed. Doyle's hand instinctively moved toward his service weapon. Rowlands did the same. They crossed the lobby together, eyes fixed on Victor and the case at his feet. Victor looked up as 2 officers approached him directly, and a familiar weight settled in his stomach. He knew from experience that when law enforcement approached a black man with that kind of focus, it rarely meant anything good. They stopped in front of him. Doyle spoke first, voice loud and authoritative. "Sir, open that case right now." Victor looked between them, confusion and caution on his face. "Excuse me, what is this about?" Rowlands moved closer, hand still near his weapon. "We received a report of a suspicious individual with a possible weapon. Open the case and show us what's inside." Victor kept his voice steady, though frustration ran underneath it. "It's a guitar. I'm waiting for my wife. She has an appointment upstairs. Why are you treating me like I've done something wrong?" Doyle's tone hardened. "Sir, we're not asking again. Open the case now, or you're being arrested for obstruction and failure to cooperate with a lawful investigation." Victor looked at both officers for a moment. The weight of the situation settled over him fully, a feeling he had experienced before but never grown comfortable with. He was being treated as a criminal simply for sitting in a hospital lobby with a guitar case, not because of anything he had done, not because he had threatened anyone, but because someone had looked at him and made a decision. He reached down, unlatched the case, and opened it. Inside was a stunning vintage Martin D28 acoustic guitar. The wood glowed a deep amber. The strings were freshly replaced. The craftsmanship was unmistakable to anyone with even a passing knowledge of fine instruments. Both officers looked at it. Rollins moved his hand away from his weapon. Doyle's expression didn't shift. Victor looked up at them. "It's a guitar, like I said. Now can someone tell me why police were called on me for sitting in a hospital lobby?" Brennan, who had been standing nearby watching the whole thing, stepped forward. His voice carried no apology and no acknowledgement that he may have made an error. "I was just doing my job. You looked suspicious. You can never be too careful." Victor's voice went quiet but firm. "Suspicious how? I was sitting with a guitar case. What exactly was suspicious about that?" Brennan crossed his arms. "You'd been sitting there a long time. I didn't recognize you." In that moment, Victor Ellison understood exactly what had happened. He had been racially profiled. Police had been summoned. He had been threatened with arrest, all because a security guard saw a black man with a case and couldn't conceive of any harmless explanation. Victor took out his phone and began recording. "I want all of your names and badge numbers, every single one of you, because what just happened here is racial profiling, and I am filing a complaint." Victor held the phone steady, keeping it trained on Brennan, on Officers Doyle and Rollins, and on the open guitar case at his feet. The same case that had contained exactly what he said it contained from the very beginning. His voice was measured, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. "Names and badge numbers, all of you. What happened here today is racial profiling, and I am not letting it go." Brennan took a small step back, arms still folded, posture defensive. "I was doing my job. Security protocol requires reporting anything that looks out of place." Victor kept his eyes on him. "What was out of place? Tell me specifically what I did." Brennan faltered slightly, and when he spoke again, some of the certainty had left his voice. "You were sitting there a long time with a big case. I didn't know you. I didn't know what was in it." Victor's voice got quieter but somehow more forceful. "So because you didn't know me, and because I had a guitar case, you called 911 and told them I might have a weapon. That's your explanation." Brennan said nothing. Officer Doyle stepped forward, attempting to redirect. "Sir, we respond to calls. When security flags a potential threat, we're required to look into it. Surely you can understand that." Victor turned to him and shook his head. "No, I can't understand it because I wasn't a threat. I was sitting in a chair. I wasn't disturbing anyone. I wasn't behaving erratically. Nothing about me should have alarmed a reasonable person. And you came over and threatened me with arrest for not opening my case fast enough. That's not an investigation. That's intimidation." Rollins tried to soften things. "We were following procedure. Once we saw it was a guitar." Victor cut him off. "You what?" Apologized. Acknowledged that calling police on a man sitting peacefully in a hospital might have been an overreaction. "No, your security guard standing right there doubled down and said he was just doing his job." By now, people throughout the lobby had stopped what they were doing and were watching. An older white woman seated 3 chairs away spoke up, her voice carrying quiet anger. "I've been sitting here longer than he has. Nobody called the police on me. Nobody asked me to open my purse." A young man near the entrance added, "I've got a backpack on. Nobody demanded I show them what's inside." A middle-aged black woman rose from her seat and moved closer. "This is exactly the problem. This man was here, minding his own business, and someone saw a black man with a case and decided he had to be dangerous. That's profiling. That's discrimination, plain and simple." Brennan's face reddened. His voice turned defensive. "I treat everyone the same. It has nothing to do with race. I saw something unusual and I reported it. That's what I'm here to do." Victor's voice cut cleanly through the room. "If you treat everyone the same, why didn't you walk over and simply ask me what was in the case? Why didn't you have a conversation with me? Why did your very first move go straight to calling 911 and saying I might have a weapon? Brennan had no answer. A hospital supervisor named Corinne Mitchell had heard the raised voices from the front desk and came over to find out what was happening. When she took in the scene, the open guitar case, 2 police officers, a growing crowd of onlookers, her expression immediately shifted to concern. "What's going on?" she asked, looking between Brennan and the officers. Doyle started to explain, but Victor spoke first. "Your security guard racially profiled me. He called police and told them I had a possible weapon. I've been sitting in this lobby for half an hour, waiting for my wife, and the only thing I did wrong was exist here while black with a guitar case." Corinne turned to Brennan. "Michael, is that true? You called the police?" Brennan nodded. "I saw him with the case. I didn't know what was inside. I thought it was the safer." Victor's voice rose slightly. "Safer for who? You felt unsafe because a black man was sitting in a hospital lobby. That is the problem. That is exactly the problem." Corinne looked at the guitar, then at Victor, and the full weight of what had occurred showed clearly on her face. She knew this was serious. She knew the hospital had made a grave mistake. "Sir, I am so sorry. This never should have happened. Can we speak about this somewhere private?" Victor shook his head. "No, we're not doing this privately. If you want to talk, we talk right here, because I want everyone in this lobby to hear what I'm about to say." He looked at Brennan, then the officers, then Corinne. "I'm a professional musician. I have performed on Grammy-nominated albums. I have worked alongside artists you have heard on the radio. That guitar is worth $12,000, and I just picked it up from a luthier who spent 3 weeks restoring it. I came here to wait for my wife while she finished a medical appointment, and I was treated like a criminal because your security guard could not imagine a single scenario where a black man with a case wasn't a threat." He paused, and when he continued, his voice was cold and deliberate. "I am filing a formal complaint. I am requesting every second of security footage from this lobby. I am contacting my attorney, and I am making absolutely certain that what happened here today does not get buried." Corinne started to respond, but Victor wasn't finished. "You can apologize as much as you want, but apologies don't undo the fact that I was sitting here peacefully and police were called on me. Apologies don't undo the fact that I was threatened with arrest for not opening my case fast enough. And apologies certainly don't undo the fact that this happens to black people every single day in places exactly like this. And most of them don't have the resources to push back." At that moment, the elevator at the far end of the lobby opened, and Angela Ellison stepped out. She saw Victor standing there with his phone raised. She saw the 2 officers. She saw the crowd. Her face moved from confusion to fury in the span of 2 seconds, and she crossed the lobby quickly. "Victor, what happened?" He turned to her, his expression easing just slightly. "They called police on me for sitting here with my guitar." Angela looked at Brennan, then at the officers, and when she spoke, her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "You did what?" The situation, already bad, was about to get significantly worse for everyone involved. Angela Ellison stood in the center of the hospital lobby, hands on her hips, eyes moving between Brennan, officers Doyle and Rowlands, and supervisor Corinne Mitchell. She had just spent 2 hours in a cardiology appointment, and she had come downstairs expecting to find her husband waiting calmly, not standing in front of police officers with a crowd of witnesses looking on. "Someone needs to explain to me right now why my husband was threatened with arrest for sitting in a hospital lobby." Corinne stepped in first, choosing her words carefully. "Ma'am, there was a misunderstanding. Our security guard saw your husband with a large case and contacted police out of caution. We sincerely apologize for—" Angela cut her off. "A misunderstanding? He was sitting with his guitar. That's not a misunderstanding. That's racial profiling." Brennan tried once more to defend himself, his voice rising. "I didn't know it was a guitar. The case was big. I was concerned about the safety of everyone in this building. Angela turned to face him directly, and when she spoke, her voice was precise and controlled. Public safety. My husband has been playing guitar professionally for 25 years. He has worked on Grammy-nominated albums. He was sitting here waiting for me, and you decided he was dangerous because you simply could not picture a black man with a guitar case doing anything other than carrying a weapon. She pulled out her phone, navigated to a website, and held up the screen. You want to know who my husband is? Let me show you. On the screen was Victor's professional website, his discography, his recording credits, photos of him in studios alongside artists whose names were immediately recognizable, and a catalog of albums he had contributed to over 20 years. He has performed with John Legend. He has worked with Alicia Keys. He has been a session musician for major record labels. That guitar in that case is worth more than your monthly paycheck, and you treated him like a criminal. Karen looked at the screen, and the color drained from her face. Doyle and Rowlands exchanged a glance, both of them now fully aware of how badly this had gone. Victor spoke again, his voice quiet but carrying absolute weight. I want all security footage from this lobby, every frame from the moment I walked in until right now. I want the 911 call recording. I want the dispatch audio. I want everything preserved and documented. Karen nodded quickly. Of course, you'll have access to all of it. I also want Michael Brennan's personnel file, because I'm willing to bet this isn't the first time something like this has happened. Karen hesitated, and in that hesitation, Victor had his answer. There are other complaints, aren't there? His voice dropped. Other people who were followed, questioned, made to feel like they didn't belong here. Karen didn't respond, but her expression said everything. Angela was already on her phone. It rang twice before someone picked up. Marcus, it's Angela. I need you at Memorial Hospital right now. Victor was racially profiled by security and police were called on him. We need legal representation immediately. She spent another minute relaying the details, then hung up and looked at Karen. Our attorney is on his way. He'll be here in 20 minutes, and when he arrives, we're going to be discussing a lawsuit. Karen's voice wavered. Please, let's not escalate this further. There may be a way to handle this internally. Angela's response came back sharp. Your staff threatened to arrest my husband for sitting in your lobby. You don't get to handle that internally. That is a civil rights violation. Victor opened the recording on his phone and played it aloud. Brennan's voice came through clearly. I was just doing my job. You looked suspicious. Then Victor's. What exactly was suspicious about me sitting here with a guitar case? Then Brennan again. You were just sitting there a long time. I didn't recognize you. Victor stopped the recording and looked at Karen. That is racial profiling, documented, on tape, and I'm going to make sure every person who needs to hear it does. By that evening, the story had already begun to spread. Victor's attorney, Marcus Reed, arrived at the hospital within 30 minutes and immediately requested the complete security footage, the 911 call recording, and Michael Brennan's full personnel file. The hospital's legal team, recognizing the severity of what had occurred, launched an internal investigation. What they uncovered made everything considerably worse. Michael Brennan had been the subject of 3 formal complaints during his 6 years at Memorial Hospital. Every single one had come from a black visitor. The first complaint, filed 2 years earlier, came from a black physician who worked at another hospital and was visiting a colleague. Brennan had trailed him through the building and demanded to see his credentials, refusing to accept that he was a doctor. The second complaint came from a black woman who had come to sit with her mother in the ICU. Brennan had questioned why she was there and asked to see her ID, even though visitor policy required no such thing. The third complaint came from a black man who had been waiting in the lobby while his son finished a physical therapy session. Brennan had watched him for 15 minutes before approaching and demanding to know what he was doing there. All three complaints had been formally documented. All three had been noted in Brennan's personnel file, and all three had been closed out with nothing more than a verbal warning: no suspension, no additional training, no meaningful accountability of any kind. The hospital had a documented pattern of discriminatory behavior by one of its security employees, and they had chosen to do nothing about it. When Marcus Reed reviewed the personnel file and saw the record of complaints, he knew immediately that this was far larger than a single incident. This was institutional. This was a hospital that had permitted a security guard to racially profile visitors for years, and it had taken one incident involving a musician with resources, documentation, and legal access to finally force the issue into the open. 2 days later, Victor and Angela sat across from Marcus in his office as he laid out the full picture. They knew, the hospital knew Brennan had a pattern of behavior. They put it in writing and then let him keep doing it. That's negligence. That's deliberate indifference, and it is going to cost them significantly. He looked at Victor. We're filing a federal lawsuit. Racial discrimination, civil rights violations, emotional distress. We're seeking $920,000 in damages. Victor didn't hesitate. Do it. The lawsuit moved through the legal system at a pace that reflected just how impossible the hospital's position was to defend. The evidence was airtight. Security footage showed Victor sitting undisturbed in the lobby for 25 minutes before Brennan placed the 911 call. The dispatch recording captured Brennan describing Victor as suspicious based on nothing beyond the color of his skin and the presence of a case. The hospital's own internal records documented 3 prior complaints against Brennan, all involving black visitors, all describing the same pattern of targeted suspicion. The hospital's attorneys looked at the evidence and drew the only rational conclusion: no jury was going to rule in their favor. A respected professional musician, racially profiled while waiting for his wife. A security guard with a documented complaint history that had been repeatedly ignored. Security footage showing a man doing absolutely nothing unusual before police were called on him. This was a civil rights attorney's strongest possible case and a defendant's worst nightmare. Memorial Hospital settled the lawsuit for $920,000 within 8 months. The settlement went beyond financial compensation. As part of the agreement, the hospital was required to immediately terminate Michael Brennan, implement mandatory bias awareness training for all security personnel, establish an independent review process for any complaints involving racial profiling, put in place clear written guidelines prohibiting security from contacting police without documented evidence of threatening behavior, and conduct quarterly audits of security incident reports to identify any emerging patterns of discriminatory enforcement. Brennan was let go 3 weeks after the incident. At 48 years old, with 6 years of hospital security experience, he was terminated on the grounds of racial profiling, filing a false report with law enforcement, and demonstrating a sustained pattern of discriminatory conduct that the institution had recorded but consistently declined to act upon. He filed an appeal. It was denied. No other hospital in the region would take him on once background checks revealed the circumstances of his dismissal. He eventually found employment as a night shift security guard at a shopping mall at roughly half his former salary. His name remained permanently tied to the case, which received coverage from both local and national media outlets. Officers Doyle and Rowlands faced no departmental discipline. They had responded to a call in good faith and had no means of knowing that the security guard's report was rooted entirely in racial bias. However, the incident was incorporated into new departmental training materials focused on how officers should respond to suspicious person calls. including the requirement to evaluate situations independently rather than simply acting on a caller's framing, to ask clarifying questions before issuing demands, and to understand that threatening arrest for the assertion of constitutional rights was a violation of both department policy and the law. The impact of the case extended well beyond Memorial Hospital. 3 other hospitals in the city reviewed their own internal security complaint records and found comparable patterns of unaddressed complaints involving Black and Latino visitors. 2 additional security guards with documented complaint histories were dismissed. Hospital systems across the region revised their security policies and training frameworks, using Victor's case as a direct cautionary example of what happens when evidence of bias is recorded and then ignored. Victor directed a portion of the settlement funds toward establishing a music education fund, providing instruments and lessons to young people in underserved communities. He continued building his career as a session musician and became a consistent public voice against racial profiling in everyday spaces, giving interviews, appearing at conferences, and sharing his story to illustrate how racial bias functions even in environments like hospitals, where people have every reason to expect to feel safe. The vintage Martin guitar at the center of the incident remained among his most treasured possessions. He went on to play it on several prominent recording sessions after the case concluded, and from time to time, he would recount the story of how a security guard had once looked at that guitar case and seen a weapon, because he simply couldn't conceive of a Black man in a hospital lobby being anything other than a threat. 5 years on, Memorial Hospital has not recorded another incident of racial profiling by its security staff. The reforms put in place through the settlement remain active, and the Independent Review Board has handled dozens of complaints with transparency and consistent accountability. Michael Brennan still works nights at a shopping mall. His name still appears at the top of search results for racial profiling incidents in healthcare settings. The security footage of Victor sitting quietly with his guitar case, followed by officers approaching him with visible aggression, is now used in training programs throughout the country as a concrete illustration of how racial bias can transform a completely harmless situation into a civil rights violation. The 911 call in which Brennan describes Victor as suspicious for sitting with a case is played in implicit bias workshops to demonstrate how race-based assumptions can generate law enforcement responses with no legitimate basis in actual danger. The lesson was costly, public, and lasting. A guitar case is not a weapon. Sitting in a hospital lobby while Black is not suspicious. And any institution that records evidence of discrimination but chooses not to act will face the consequences in the form of lawsuits, mandatory reforms, and a damaged reputation that takes years to recover. Victor Ellison never received a personal apology from Michael Brennan, but he received something that mattered far more: accountability, structural reform, and a $920,000 settlement that sent a clear message to hospitals, security companies, and anyone in a position of authority. Racial profiling carries real consequences, and those consequences are expensive. If you believe a professional musician should be able to sit in a hospital lobby without police being called on him, share this story. What changes do you think hospitals need to make to stop security guards from profiling visitors? Leave your answer in the comments. And if this reminded you that a guitar case is not a weapon and sitting peacefully is not a crime, subscribe. We won't stop until every person can exist in a public space without being treated as a threat based on the color of their skin.